Hey there, guys. It's been a hot minute since I watched some Potential History. The love of my life. It's been a real long time, so there's probably no one that's going to understand that. I said it in like a one of my previous uh Potential History reactions. I said I love him, and then he saw that video and he said he loved me too. I'm sorry. It's been so long, Potential History. I'm sorry. Um, I just feel like when it comes to Potential History, he does such a good job with it, and especially he also focuses kind of pretty heavily on um like Japan and stuff. And I feel like I can't speak too much on Japan. Um, I just it just is, and World War II in general is something I feel like I'm not that good at talking too much about, and I want to give Potential History quality reactions because I know I'm pretty bad at that sometimes. He deserves the best from me. Um, so we'll see here. Maybe I can give why Japan surrendered. He's my guess is he's probably like he's going to like he's gonna be like refuting the whole like uh, I don't know. I really don't know. It's a combo of factors. Like so many people say that like Japan was getting ready to surrender because they were having food shortages. However, right then of course there's the question of we really could like that's information coming to us post-war, right? When the war was over and Americans were allowed into the country and like humanitarian aid people were allowed into the country, their reports came back that Japan was starving. That's something we didn't really like. I think we probably guessed that they were starving just because of how long the war was going on, right? Estimates, things like that. The bombings. So we could estimate that they were starving. How much they were starving, you know, again, it's coming from post-war information. So it's a little different in my mind, you know. It's probably as close as we can get in terms of accurate information. Um and I cuz I'm sure the Jap I a warring nation probably is not going to be accurate in telling their occupiers, the people that defeated them, yeah, our people weren't starved. You know, they're probably going to fudge the numbers a bit too. Their own documents to make them like self sound better or something. I'm just like shooting shit right now. I'm just speaking words, cuz guessing here. I'm pure guess. This is all guesswork because yeah. Um so history potential history here is probably going to say something super smart and provide some he does a really good job of providing historical um not context, but looking at it through the lens like how you're kind of taught to do it at university as a historian. That kind of lens. I've said this in pretty much every other, I think, potential history reaction of mine. Anyways, I'm rambling here. Let's watch.
You ever heard of George Pickett? He was a general, perfume enthusiast, war
Wait a second. Which fucking movie is that from? It looks familiar, but I can't. I haven't watched Civil War movies in yeah, Civil War movies in a hot minute.
uh, war criminal, and
Uh,
person in the
I mean, can you call yourself an American general and not be a war criminal at the same time? Like, American general, war criminal kind of go hand in hand.
wrong place at the wrong time, ordered to carry out the disastrous charge that would forever have his name attached to it at Gettysburg. Post-war, there was a fascination in the U.S.
Also, why are we talking about the Civil War when we're
over the
trust the
defeat
process?
there. And, as you can imagine, Pickett was often asked what he thought was the cause of this huge defeat. But whenever asked, his reply was always the same. I think the Yankees had something to do with it.
Ah, trust the process.
Let's talk about Japan.
Okay.
So if you know one thing about the Japanese in World War II, it's their reputation to not give up. From the individual to the unit to the government, holding out and preferring death to giving up. So it's kind of weird they gave up, right? Like,
I was gonna say something, and then now I'm just laughing.
really, you could make an argument Germany held out longer and more in line with the stereotypical Japanese warrior spirit than Japan itself did. Japan even got like a semi-conditional surrender and peacefully welcomed an occupation. Whereas Germany,
Protecting nature begins with you. Defend the natural world you love by donating to the Nature.
so how did that happen? And that question, for some reason, has become this huge point of debate recently.
Okay, I see where he's going with this.
Well, more like a year ago, but this is when I'm getting to it.
Yep.
And it's very dumb because it's turned into this monocausal debate of the true cause of Japan's surrender. But here we
I know exactly what he's talking about because I remember this video was uploaded like 7 months ago or something, and he's like, this debate happening online like a year ago, so 2 years ago now. I know exactly what debate he's talking about. I remember seeing it online. I saw it on TikTok a lot at the time.
There we go. So there are two arguments. Most people believe that it was the dropping of the 2 atomic bombs that scared Japan into surrendering. That is this camp's be-all, end-all point, given that on August 6th, one was dropped, showing Japan that the US had the capability, with the second dropped on the 9th, confirming that it wasn't some kind of one-off thing, and inferring that it could literally be done until there was no one left. Or they gave up. You know, simple cause and effect.
Bomb was finally released exactly at the designated hour, and the explosion occurred as planned.
The other big one is that Soviet intervention caused Japan's surrender. The story from that point of view goes, a bomb is dropped August 6th, Japan doesn't respond and doesn't care, but on August 9th, the Red Army invades Manchuria, and then the Japanese surrender, and they just kind of ignore the other bomb. Now, I'm gonna let you in on a secret. Both these takes are dumb.
Yes! My love for you stays potential history. Yes. My reasoning for why the Soviet invasion of Manchuria did nothing to affect the fucking Japanese decision to surrender is this. With what navy could the Soviets invade Japan? Because we all know the USA is not going to help the Soviets invade Japan with any sort of naval support at all. We know that. Effect at this point in time, right? Especially with the split that's going to happen in Germany. I think it's safe to say the US is not going to give any assistance to the Soviets to where they are going to have to split Japan in half with the commies. Okay? They already are going to have to relent Manchuria to the Soviets. They have to give up a bunch of Europe to the Soviets. They're going to do what they can to keep Japan entirely unsplit, right? And the Soviets do not have a navy now at this point in the time, the Japanese do not have a navy really to oppose a naval invasion. However, the amount of vessels needed to bombard the shoreline, the planes then needed to also fly over and provide aerial support over invasion points, and the vessels needed to transport the troops. The Soviets at that time do not have that. They don't have enough. Maybe give them a few months to a year, they could probably build it, because the Soviet economy is booming at this time through the war effort, through the war economy. But they don't have that in the East at that time. They don't. The Soviets are not a naval power. They never even got to be a naval power during the Cold War. The Soviet, it is the threat to the mainland of Japan that the Japanese government is worried about. / also an internal rebellion, right? Which I think is, I'm going to assume it's going to be the starvation that potential history leans in on as the primary reason for surrender, which is the point I heavily agree with. I lean towards. I hope we agree on the same thing.
Seriously, whenever people discuss the surrender of Japan and make their case, it always involves the most flagrant use of cherry-picking I have ever seen and ignoring certain facts. And I'm not even including all the counterfactuals when you expand the conversation to the morality of all of it, which, to be extremely clear, is not what this video is about. This is a whole different conversation.
Yeah. I mean, here's the thing. War bad. I mean, it's not a hot take, and it's not a hot take to say the dropping of the atomic. I'll make it a fucking morality debate. Potential history won't. I will, because I don't care what people say. I care a little. But it's not a fucking big brain thing to say the atomic bombs are an atrocity. They are. Now, of course, the deeper debate of were they necessary to end the war? That's another thing that's a lot harder to talk about, and something I will not talk about. I think I've talked about it before. I don't want to talk about it now.
We are just talking about what got Japan to quit. I'm not going into that. I mean, maybe one day if you ask nice enough. Now, for all of this to become super clear, all you need is a timeline of events and to work out how they interact with each other, while not leaving any of them out. By mid-1945, everybody in Japan knew how bad the situation was. Absolutely no one held out any hope for what could be called a victory in the traditional sense of the word. There are no Steiner's counterattacks here. This is Japan in 1945. You are going to die. One thing often missed when talking about this was, at this point, that kind of victory wasn't the goal. The goal was really, at this point, just a negotiated peace to avoid utter defeat. And their plan for this was called Ketsugo. The general idea for it was to bleed the Americans until they gave up. Now, this is not far off from what the Japanese had hoped to do pretty much the entire war. They were always realistic about the fact that as long as morale held, they were going to get trounced by the United States. But what began as a hope for an anti-war sentiment after Pearl Harbor was now taking its final form here at the end, with now trying to take as many Americans with them as possible and hope there's some Japan left by the time they give up. And this plan was going to be enacted during the American invasion of Japan they knew was coming. These policies were enacted by a council called the Big Six, made up of 4 Navy, 2 Army, and 1 civilian member that had to agree unanimously on all decisions for the nation. And they were very, very united in this policy. All of this is to say that Japan wasn't just preparing for an invasion, they were hoping for it. It was the goal. They wanted the Americans to come to them and make Okinawa look like
I gotta watch Letters from Iwo Jima. I never have.
a joke, so that those weak-willed Americans would leave them alone. And Japan, although technically defeated in pretty much all its war aims, would still keep its institutions, government, and not be occupied. And until
I mean, it kept all of its institutions, just got occupied.
August of 1945, to the Japanese, it looked like that was going to pretty much have to play itself out. But then in the course of less than a week, all of that changed. On August 6, 1945, Little Boy was dropped on Hiroshima and destroyed it. But surprisingly, for being the first people to have the literal power of the sun harnessed against them, the Japanese response was actually pretty muted. The Big Six and the government were not really impressed at all. Japan had a nuclear program during World War.
Well, I think the reason that they were not that all impressed by it is just because my logic would be they would have what the atomic bomb did. Granted, the atomic bomb did it in a much shorter time span. Is that it did the damage that the fiber bombings had done over the course of the war, right? The fiber bombings in total killed more people. And again, it was only 2 atomic bombs that were dropped, whereas the fire bombings were campaigns of bombings. But right, it essentially, like, they both kind of did the same thing. Although you can live in the places that were firebombed, but you can't really live in the places that were nuked.
War II, although it wasn't successful, it gave them a really good idea of how Herculean a task it was to create one of these things. And so for those who actually believed it was a nuclear device, they figured there was no way there could be more than one. The Army and Navy's opinions were even more extreme, with the Army flat out denying that it was a nuclear weapon, demanding more evidence, and the Navy essentially saying, "That's neat. Do it 5 more times and I might be scared." And as far as official responses from the Japanese government, there was nothing. Fast forward to 3 days later, the Red Army invades Manchuria with fantastic success, essentially rolling over the Kwangtung Army and its allies. As you can imagine, this was not ideal. Japan had been doing everything it could to not provoke the Soviet Union this entire war after 1939. And people in the Japanese government had actually been really hoping that the USSR might be convinced to mediate peace talks between.
Okay, this is another situation where I ended up speaking probably too early about my hypotheses and stuff in this video. Yeah, kind of just like a combination of it all happening together, right? Not the surrender of Japan, things like that, they never come about because of one thing. It is always a combo of multiple things happening together in a short span of time that make decisions like that. That's just history.
They and the U.S. Peace talks with terms the U.S. would never accept, but nonetheless.
Although, again, I still believe that the Soviet Union's invasion of Manchuria really does not do that much because, again, I don't know, my logical thinking is like, how the fuck are the Soviets gonna get to the island of Japan? As far as I'm aware, they don't really have the fleet capacity to land a force big enough and maintain that force.
But although they were now fighting large country number 4 at this point, there was still no move to action from the government. Upon hearing the news, Army Chief of Staff this guy pretty much dismissed it out of hand, saying that, yes, this is an unwelcome development, but this does not invalidate Ketsugo, essentially saying, hey, if the Soviets want to land too, it's all killing allies to me. Then, no kidding, about 10 hours after the Soviet invasion begins, another bomb is dropped on Nagasaki, destroying it. But even then still, on the 9th, the Big Six cannot come to a unanimous decision for what to do. It takes until the next day, August 10th, that an imperial conference is called and Hirohito makes the decision to surrender, breaking a 3-3 tie on what to do. Now this is normally where the retelling ends, but this leaves the situation far from sorted, as maybe the government decided to surrender, but what about the army? In fact, this whole war started because the army wasn't listening to the government in 1933.
Oh, I didn't know that.
There's absolutely no guarantee that they're going to go along with this. In fact, right after the decision, General Kawabe's deputy chief of staff was asked by another senior general, what if the officers don't follow the order? To which he said without hesitation in his diary, yeah, a lot of them probably won't. And after that, just like he predicted, 2 of the 3 Japanese area army commanders, one in China and one in Southeast Asia, declared that they would not stop fighting. On top of this, there was actually a coup by a bunch of middle-ranking officers to steal the surrender declaration recording Hirohito made, and probably to kill pro-peace government figures and possibly even try to take control of the emperor himself. Now, the whole thing was horribly planned and had no chance of success, but it goes to show that the government saying, we give up, is not the end of the story. Skipping ahead, on August 15th,
Potential history, I love you, man. I'm learning so much right now.
Hirohito's surrender declaration is played to the Japanese people. Now, it mentions only the atomic bombings and not the invasion of Manchuria by the Soviet Union. This has been used by those who argue the bombs solely ended the war as evidence for the fact that the Soviet Union played no part. But it makes sense why he would only mention this to the Japanese people, who both had a frame of reference for it and were being affected by it. The Soviet invasion of Manchuria would have meant nothing to them, and would not have made any sense as a reason to surrender, being something that was far off on the mainland. The opposite was the case everywhere else, though. Although Japan had officially surrendered, the army just flat out refused to stop fighting the Soviets in many sectors. This, as you can imagine, would be a political nightmare, and could only go on for so long until your enemies just no longer believe that you're actually trying to surrender and start thinking that this was probably just some trick to buy time. So on August 17th, a shorter speech by Hirohito was given to call the military itself to surrender. And although the tone of both speeches are very similar, the call to action is over the Soviet intervention, with the bombs not being mentioned at all. But this also makes a lot of sense, because it is directed at people who aren't in Japan, and are bearing the brunt of fighting all these enemies abroad. To the individual commanders, hearing about Hiroshima and Nagasaki would have been an incredible non-issue given 2 things. One,
I've got no words, man. I've got no words. He's nailing it. He's doing potential history is just like fucking it just, why am I here? I mean, I'm learning, which is the kind of the point, but it's like I kind of feel bad because I got nothing to say.
Cities have been destroyed before. This was another firebombing of Tokyo by a different name. They had to be thinking, we were fine with that when it happened. How is this any different? And they also have no concept of what an atomic bomb even is. So the magnitude of the event was just lost on.
And for those watching, you can really see the difference between someone that kind of specializes in the Pacific World War II study and someone, me, that does not. You can really see like just the knowledge differential here.
On them. And two, Japan had already decided to fight this thing out till the end and rule over what was left. Since they were doing exactly that in the occupied territories, they 100% expected people to be doing that on the home islands. Mentioning the Soviet invasion implied that they couldn't really bleed the enemy to a stalemate anymore with a whole nother country arrayed against them. That kind of line of thinking utterly invalidates Ketsugo, and was really the only thing that would convince them to lay down their arms. Basically, at this point, there's so much against us, this stalemate, or this forcing the enemy to give up, just isn't possible anymore. You really see all of this play out post-war in memoirs for both points of view. Generals abroad always say the surrender came from the Soviet intervention. Governmental figures, and those on the home islands, will say it was the bombs. And that gets to my point. There's no singular reason for Japan's surrender.
Damn, not even a mention of the, well, kind of a pseudo mention of the starvation, just by saying things ain't looking good in Japan.
In the course of 3 days, just 3 days, things went from a terrible situation with basically a national suicide pact to the sky falling, both figuratively and literally, depending on where you were. And even after that, there were still significant holdouts. History is the study of cause and effect, but I think that people often want to make that a lot cleaner than it actually is.
Yep.
No event takes place for a singular reason, especially one as messy as this. So if I had to say why the Japanese surrendered in 1945, I think the Allies had something to do with it.
Chef's kiss. Chef's kiss, potential history. I've got nothing really to add here at the end. He did a phenomenal job, as I knew he would. I really want to watch his video on the history of the girls on Panzer or whatever the fuck it's called. I've never seen that thing before, so I won't know shit, but I don't know, it kind of seems like something stupid and fun to watch, so I might react to that one. I don't know. Yeah, this one was a bit of a messy reaction just because I don't know like, I know some Japanese history, but like not this part. I don't really know. I don't really study World War II. I don't find World War II all that interesting. But it had been such a long time since I watched Potential History. I needed to watch him again. I really missed his content. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more. And I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.